Welcome to the Waves Business Coaching Podcast, where you can equip yourself with the tools and insights to build the dream team your business needs so that you can lead with more confidence, master your people challenges, and reclaim your freedom. I'm your host, Jacob Karnes, business coach and author of Master Your First Job. This week on the podcast, I just had an amazing interview with Eric Collett. He is the CEO of A Mind for All Seasons, and we have a great conversation about mental health and really cognitive health and how that intersects with productivity. So if you're a business owner or business leader listening, I can't tell you how valuable about our 30-minute conversation is, just talking about steps you can take to build your foundation for cognitive health and how that can lead to you being more productive and honestly just being a better worker, better leader, better husband, better wife, better parent. I think it all intersects, and he just has a ton of wealth to add to your day. So great interview. Be sure to stick around to listen to that. I did write a book called Master Your First Job to help first-time employees thrive in their roles and help business owners better understand and develop their young talent. If you'd like a free copy of this book, you can go to masteryourfirstjob.com/free. It's masteryourfirstjob.com/free and get a free e-copy of the book and instructions of how to send it to your Kindle if you want that as well. Let's dive into this great conversation with my new friend Eric about cognitive health and how it can make your productivity better as a business leader. Eric, thanks so much for being on the Waves Business Coaching Podcast. Man, I'd love for you to take the next 5 minutes or so to share with us who you are, your story, and, here.
Thank you so much, Jacob. I'm really excited to be on with you today and to have this conversation. My story really starts, as far as my business involvement and my passion and what I do for work, starts when I was a kid. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, and I used to play at business with my brothers. We would sit around, we turned over a box in the basement, and we would pretend to have different types of companies. One of them was making stamps. We would take wax paper and typing paper, and we'd draw pictures on it. We'd put glue on the back and lay it on the wax paper, and we'd make these stickers, I guess. And we would do that for hours. And then as I got a little bit older, I started going into work with my dad. He owned a custom photo lab doing printing and large format stuff for professional photographers.
Yeah.
And so I'd go down to his office and I would kind of observe and listen to him talk to customers. And eventually my first job was helping him. I was printing black and white pictures of LaserJet printers for Hewlett Packard for their annual shows before they had the capacity to actually do that stuff themselves, which is kind of odd to think about.
That is funny.
And as I got older, because I love to learn, people were saying, gosh, Eric, you're really good academically. You should be a doctor. And I was very interested in the human body. And so I thought that sounded like a good thing. And I got an academic scholarship to the University of Utah. I'm from Boise, Idaho, and there was no medical school in Idaho at the time. So I was like, hey, closest medical school, that's a good idea. I'll go down there. And I was trying to stand out from all the biology majors by being a piano and saxophone performance major. So I've always liked art and science, which is kind of an interesting combination.
That is cool.
You can probably tell I wasn't all that bright because I actually signed up to be a piano and saxophone performance major and do pre-med. And so I was living in the practice room and I had no social life, and it was crazy. And it didn't take very long to realize I was pursuing what everyone else was telling me that I should do.
Yep.
And I took a step back and I said, what am I actually interested in? And the answer at that time was, well, I'm interested in all this stuff, but I have to focus, and what I want to learn about is people. So I actually got a degree in interpersonal and group communication and studied psychology. Okay. I got married my senior year of college, and my wife was expecting our first child by the time we graduated. And we were getting kicked out of married student housing, had no place to go. I was working part-time as an assistant to a farmer's insurance agent, making $8 an hour. And I had the harsh reality that I couldn't even afford an apartment. And I went, no, what am I going to do? I wanted to go on to graduate school, but I needed to get a job. Yeah. And I stumbled on a job as a program director at an assisted living community. And I literally told myself, this is what I'm going to do for maybe 6 months while I'm interviewing in the off hours for my real job.
Right.
And it didn't take very long for me to realize I loved what I was doing, partly because I had been interested in degenerative diseases of the brain like Alzheimer's since high school. I wrote a paper on Alzheimer's in high school and theorized some of the reasons that I thought the disease might develop. And that, combined with having an interpersonal communication degree, plopped me into what was the equivalent of a little living laboratory where I could try different approaches with people. I could attempt things that might be helpful. And so I stuck with it and eventually became an executive director. And I had a 16-year career running assisted living and memory care communities. And toward the end of that, I needed to make a change. And we don't have time to go into all of the details here, but I really wanted to do something on my own that would influence a broader audience. And at the same time, there were some things going on in my family with my wife's health where I needed more time freedom.
Yeah.
And so I ended up taking a flying leap in 2016, started a Mind for All Seasons as a solopreneur, thinking that I was going to help family and professional caregivers around the country learn how to take better care of people living with horrible diseases of the brain. And a year into it, I was having a lot of fun. I was getting on a lot of stages. I was helping a lot of people. And I had an opportunity to meet the man who's now my business partner, Randy Vaudry. He became the chief medical officer of A Mind for All Seasons. And as we started collaborating, we realized I brought a lot of the art side of the equation to the table. He brought a lot of the science side of the equation because he had trained with some of the top neurologists and other researchers in the world on what actually causes degenerative diseases of the brain and what could you do to start turning that around. And it's been a wild ride ever since. We've been at it together now for about 7 years, and I never could have predicted that we would be helping everyone from teenagers to elderly people with everything from attention deficit issues to we've worked with professional athletes to help their brains recover after brain injuries and post-concussion syndrome. And we help people with degenerative diseases of the brain improve their symptoms as much as possible by leveraging cutting-edge science. So it's been a super fun ride, and I'm really excited for where we're headed into the future because the last 10 years or so in terms of brain science have been totally game-changing.
This is phenomenal. I mean this wholeheartedly. I feel like I say this every episode. I try to only bring on guests where I am interested in the topic. This is fascinating. I've always been fascinated by brain stuff, loved science growing up, and still try to, dabble where I can, I guess, without being full-time in school with it. This is fascinating. And I think it's so timely too, given the focus on mental health in the last few years. I'd say it's been exponential as far as people's awareness of it and talking about it publicly. Before we dive further into that, I do have a quick question going back to something you said with your dad being an entrepreneur and playing business. You hinted at you mentioned for a second your first job. So I wrote a book called Master Your First Job. So I like to ask my guests, can you go back to what was your first job? What did you actually do? What were you getting paid to do at your first job?
Yeah, my first real paid job was processing black and white photos in a darkroom at my dad's photo lab. And it was a crazy job because there was a saloon on the opposite side of the wall. So I'd go down like Friday night and I'd be running stuff through and there'd be a live band on the other side of the wall. So the wall's thrumming away with this band and I'm just sitting there in the dark room at midnight running photo paper through the enlarger and making prints for whatever company that we were doing work for at the time. So it was pretty cool.
Did your dad pay you well?
Back in the day, yeah, I'd say he was paying me pretty well.
There you go. I'm like, there's weird laws where, if your family's working, you don't have to pay him. I'm like, well, I sure hope he's getting paid. I mean, that we could have a whole conversation about processing photos. I watched, again, I feel like my YouTube algorithm is all educational videos about how that works. And even that's fascinating because, I'm a millennial, so I've only grown up in the digital photography age, really.
Mm-hmm.
So that's fascinating. So let's dive into some of the work you do and how it's helpful and timely for business owners and business leaders. So you've mentioned that there's insights you've learned from your first couple of jobs that you wish you'd known back then. Can you share a few of those lessons that you learned?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it took me a long time to realize that everybody has certain things in their job that they just love and where they're operating in what some people would call their zone of brilliance, or if you're an EOS fan, it's your unique abilities. And then there are other things where it's just mundane, and every job has some of the mundane, some of the things that people don't like. But I wish that I had been more intentional very early on at paying attention to when I was in love with my job. When was it that things were effortless, when I just loved showing up for whatever the thing was that I was doing? What is it that I would do even if I wasn't getting paid to do it? And as I awakened to that, as I became more aware of it and actually started journaling about some of those things and really paying attention to it, I started recognizing opportunities in a way that I hadn't seen before. I was able to take steps forward more intentionally because I was aware of my unique skills and abilities and the things that I was naturally motivated to do. And that's really something that I've pulled into even how I run my own company today as the CEO of A Mind for All Seasons. I'm much more intentional in looking for the strengths of others and trying to leverage those strengths, because that's when they naturally show up because they want to. They're doing things that they love. And if you can put people in those kinds of seats on the bus, then magic happens. And had I known that earlier on, I think I would have been a lot more effective as a leader. And I think my career probably would have accelerated a little bit faster than it did.
Have you read or are you familiar with The 6 Types of Working Genius by Patrick Lencioni?
Yes, it's
okay
on the bookshelf.
There,
Right
I'm like,
yeah.
When he said that, I'm like, that's all I thought about. I read it and immediately was like, all right, I want to start teaching this to people, and I went and got certified. But, as I encounter a lot of young people, you mentioned when you were young, you started journaling about it. One, I'd say that's a great piece of advice is journal through a lot of things. I've become a big fan of journaling, even though I say anti-journaling. I just didn't see the point. Thought it was, growing up, I was like, oh, girls do that. I don't do that. Now I'm a huge fan of it. But as I've encountered business owners too, it's not just young people that are dealing with like doing work that they hate, trying to figure out what they enjoy doing. There's people who are, 50 plus who are figuring out, oh, actually I'm doing this work that I've hated for years and spending time on. So I think that's great advice. Let's dive into
maybe
go ahead.
I was going to say just a couple other quick things.
Yeah.
I spent too long in my first, what I call my first real job. It was really my first job out of college as a program director at an assisted living community. I spent way too long focused on where I wanted to be and not learning to have joy in what I was doing at the moment. I was not focused on making the most of that opportunity at first because I was just waiting for the future to come. And it wasn't until I settled back and realized that I need to actually make the most of this opportunity. And it's not that I wasn't doing good work or showing up every day with purpose. I just didn't have the right mindset about it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like marital relationships. I've been happily married for 25 years.
Congrats.
But thank you. When I was younger, though, and I wasn't married and I wanted to have a relationship, it took a while to realize I got to get really good at being happily single before I could ever be the kind of person that would be happily married.
That's right.
And when it comes to the job, it's kind of the same thing. I had to be really happy at an entry-level job and figure out what I loved about it and magnify that. And then opportunity naturally came.
And I think too, like taking that to business owners, it's like be happy at, if you're like, I want to double our revenue. So before you get there, you got to be happy at exactly where you are in the state of your business so that you can get to where you want to be. I had a friend, I was in my first role at the Chick-fil-A corporate office and had been rejected for a couple of like promotion roles that I wanted and was really frustrated. And I had a friend tell me like, if you could go back in time 5 years and show yourself where you are right now, like what would you say and what would you do to get there? And I was like, I can't believe where you are right now. I'd be elated. I'd be blown away. I'd be proud of myself. And it was like, oh, that was a good reminder of, you know what? I can be proud of myself in my role. I'm where I wanted to be. I'm more than where I wanted to be 5 years ago. Like I've well exceeded my own expectation. I think that's a great mindset to have. It's just like, how can you find joy where your feet are instead of finding joy in what could be down the road? I think that's huge.
I think it's learning to balance satisfaction and striving. And I should have realized this earlier on because it's a lesson from practicing an instrument. I can have satisfaction in a really good practice session, and I can still recognize that, hey, I'm not ready to get on stage at Carnegie Hall as a pianist or a saxophonist or something. But I can have satisfaction that I worked really hard that day and I actually made progress and I can see the progress. And looking back over time, as a musician, I can see massive progress even though I'm not a professional. So there's this balance between satisfaction and striving in all that we do. And some people fail to have satisfaction in the moment because they're so focused on striving that they don't counterbalance it with their wins today.
I've definitely been there. That's something I struggle with. Something you've mentioned is like taking care of the brain, and brain health might be the most important thing a person can do to increase productivity. On the surface, I'm like, yes, I agree, but why? Like, why is that so critical?
Yeah, great question. The brain is our tool, especially working in this knowledge economy. So many of us are not out there earning a living through brute force labor.
Right.
We're using our brains. And I would invite you to think about the brain as like your hardware, and your skills are like software. So a lot of people want to be more productive. They want to accomplish as much as possible in the day, or they want to develop some new skill. Maybe they're going to get good at selling to people. And so they go take a course in sales. Whatever you're studying, whether you're reading a book or you're listening to a podcast or you're going to a class, that's like loading software. But if the hardware is not functioning optimally, you're always going to get limited results in the same way that you do if you get computer software and load it on a really old machine. And I've learned over the last several years working with a lot of business leaders who want to get their brains as optimal as possible, that people naturally get 20 to 30% more done when the brain is working really effectively because their processing speeds are up, their ability to focus and concentrate is up, their energy level is up. And you don't have to have a course for that. When you optimize the hardware and then you go study things out and you get really good skills, wow, that's like 10x. That's the best of both worlds. And that's what I recommend to people. Prioritize the hardware and develop the software, and you're going to do great.
So I'm all about, I love the buzzwords. I'm like, but they're not buzzwords. It's like, I like the optimization. I like the streamlining. I'm all about making my productivity better. It's something I'm like, I want to be known as someone who's efficient. I'm all about it. What's like a first step I could take? Or if you're listening, like what's a first step our listeners could take as far as like, how can I make my hardware better and optimize it?
It's a great question. It's a really difficult one to answer because brain health is never about one thing. And a lot of the world is looking for this magic answer. So marketers really leverage this. You get all sorts of supplements out there where the marketer says, hey, you want more energy? You want more focus? You want more concentration, productivity? Take this pill.
That's right.
And so people are like, well, that's the thing that I want. And most people buy stuff because of the outcome that they want.
Yep.
But if you just take a step back and you consider that the body and the brain are a system of systems, then you realize looking for one thing, one answer is kind of like you're driving down the road and you're trying to figure out why your car's working so well or not working so well. And you're like, is my car operating well because the engine's functioning, or is it the transmission? Or is it because the electrical system is functional? And of course, the answer is, well, all of the above. It all has to be working. So I think a good place for anybody to start is to just have a general overview of what is the foundation of really good brain health and physical health. And if you were to pick one thing off that list where maybe you're not as good, focus on that one thing and you're going to be moving forward in a positive direction. But let's not lose sight of the big picture and the body as a system of systems as well. So if you want, we could go through a few foundational things. And I bet everybody would have one or two things where they'd say, okay, that's the area where I'm least successful, and maybe that's where I'm going to focus.
So I'd love to get into this, like what makes up this foundation? I have it. Can I guess one of them, something that I've worked on?
You bet.
Sleep. Where does sleep rank in your foundation?
Well, you cannot have a good brain without sleep, but most people don't understand exactly why that is. Most people recognize intuitively, hey, if I get a poor night's sleep, I'm hosed the next day. Things aren't good for me.
On the surface, right.
But what do we actually know physiologically? There's actually a system that operates while we're sleeping that most people haven't even heard of. And it was only really validated scientifically in about 2014. It's called the glymphatic system. And you can think of it as like the clean cycle for the brain. So when we're asleep, the brain actually shrinks a little bit and the fluid-filled spaces, the ventricles, open up, and the body makes about 1.5 cups of new cerebrospinal fluid, and it literally bathes the brain and washes out cellular waste and debris and misfolded proteins. And then it flushes that into the lymphatic system, which is kind of like the sewer of the body, and we eliminate it. So if you are getting less than 7 to 8 hours of good, deep, restful sleep, where you're cycling through the stages of sleep, 5 or 6 times a night, then you're not clearing out the trash. And over time, the
Wow.
waste builds up and you get into trouble. So sleep is not for the weak, as some people have said. You have to sleep to be superior. No questions about it. So that's a whole area that, wow, when I'm working with our members that are Mind for All Seasons, and we're having everything from master classes to recorded content or whatever it is that we're doing, that's one of the areas that we're trying to help people optimize. And we could talk for hours just about sleep optimization.
That's fascinating. That's an area I've definitely worked on for myself over the last, I'd say 2 years, is just figuring out how to, I had a hard time falling asleep. I dealt with some insomnia, but it's something I've worked really hard at. And I've noticed a huge difference just with fixing this one thing of, like, my goal is to get at least 7.5. And I've averaged over the last 2 months getting just over 8 hours of sleep, which I'm really proud of. I'm like, to me, it sounds silly to be like, I'm proud of how much sleep I'm getting, but I'm proud of it because I've seen a result on the other side of how much energy I have just simply by fixing like sleep. I'd love to know, what else would you say makes up this foundation of getting your brain systems and body systems right?
Yeah, there's so much stuff that you can't medicate or supplement your way out of.
Right.
And foundational things would include physical activity,
Okay.
exercise. You can't have as optimal a brain and a physical system if you're not moving. You may have heard it said, sitting is the new smoking. We recognize that the human body is meant to move, and there's so much good that comes from physical activity. And that includes a lot better blood flow, better oxygenation. You can't have a good brain if you're not getting good blood flow up to the brain. So that's huge. Exercise improves mitochondrial functioning and size and number. And mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. That's what's producing energy. So if you're stimulating the body to make more and have bigger mitochondria, you have a greater energy capacity. It's like going from a standard battery to a nice lithium ion battery, and you're like, ooh, I'm juiced up. So physical activity will do that. Diet matters a lot.
Yeah.
Food is fuel, and there's nothing more controversial. Well, there's probably something more controversial, but one of the most controversial things out there is diet. And you get a lot of tribalism when it comes to diet. But there are actually principles that people can leverage to get really good results with how they're fueling their body. And that has a huge impact on how we're performing. So we could spend all kinds of time digging into diet. Stress management is huge. When you have chronic negative stress in your life and your body is just under a constant onslaught, it literally causes the memory center of the brain to deteriorate. That part of the brain is very sensitive. And you've heard it said, stress is a killer. Well, it really does move us in a negative way. Too much stress is overwhelming, and too little stress is actually a problem. If we're not stressing our body in just the right ways, then we're not as resilient. It's really important to also have new cognitive experiences. You can't stimulate your brain to have new connections if you're not giving it a reason to form new connections. So people ask me constantly, well, okay, I want to do brain training, Eric. So should I do Sudoku? Should I do crosswords? Is that what you're talking about? And the answer is, well, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but you'll just get better at doing Sudoku or crosswords or whatever you choose. The idea is to have novel cognitive experience. Learn a new language or brush your teeth or eat with your non-dominant hand. That forces new connections in the brain, literally.
That's interesting.
One of the best things about being an entrepreneur is that you have to learn so much new stuff constantly. That's right. And you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable if you're going to be successful.
Does reading count? If I'm reading about a subject I know nothing about, is that stressing that area, or is that not really?
Maybe.
Okay.
I think a lot of people just consume information voraciously because they feel like that's going to lead them to success. But most people don't actually learn that information. And really effective learners do things differently. They don't just take a book and read through it and say, great, I read that book. Yeah, put another notch on my chart that I accomplished that. Most people don't actually study it. So if you're really digesting something well, you're looking for key principles. You're thinking about how you're going to apply it. you're mind mapping things out. Maybe you've got your journal or whatever you record things in open, and you're actually looking for key things and thinking about how they apply in all sorts of different contexts in your life. And then the real litmus test is, can you teach it to somebody else?
Yep.
You don't know something until you're actually sharing it with another. So one of the things that's helpful to me is to study something out and then turn right around and try to share it with someone else, because I find out where I'm stuck and deficient in my learning when I try to articulate it.
Yeah. That's huge. So I know there's listeners who are probably like, this all sounds great. I know mental health matters, brain health matters. I want to be more healthy, but like I'm just busy. Like, what might be a sign that their brain health actually needs some attention and needs some focus on it?
Yeah, this is going to sound a little counterintuitive, but the single biggest sign that your brain needs attention is you've never measured anything that relates to brain health.
Interesting.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
A quick little story that I often share with people. When I was a kid, my next youngest brother and I went out into the back field, and we dragged home a bunch of boards from an old barn, and we cobbled together this play fort that was a disaster. And my dad was like,
fun, though.
That's not going to cut it. So my dad turned around and he built us a really nice play tower that had these tall swings, the kind that you see on playgrounds where it's like really big. I mean, you can get going super high on that. So it was really exciting. And the daredevil in me came out, and I would stand on the seat of one of those swings and I would just pump up and down and try to get going as high as I could. Because when you get up there a ways, you're even worried your feet might slip off the seat. And so it was a thrill. It was exciting. And I did that often for about 2 years. I'd go out and I'd swing for a while, and my brothers and I, or the neighborhood kids, would kind of see who could get going the highest. And all the while, I thought everything was fine. I thought I was flying high. This is great. Until one summer morning, I was on the backswing and one of the chains broke, and over the fence I went, landed on a log. Thankfully, I didn't get paralyzed, but I spent the rest of the summer in a neck brace.
Wow.
And people hear all the time, hey, what you don't know won't hurt you. And I learned that day, what you don't know might kill you.
That's right.
Because later on, upon inspection, what we found is that the chain at the very top that was attached to the eye bolt that was screwed into the beam there, the chain was rubbing. And for 2 years, frequently, every time somebody rode that swing, the chain just rubbed and wore away a little bit of metal until eventually it snapped. And the reality with brain health is things like Alzheimer's disease actually start decades before symptoms even show up. So the single biggest thing to look at with your brain health is if you have not measured your cognitive performance, if you haven't looked at all the root cause factors that actually contribute to a poorly performing brain now and a disastrous brain down the road, that's the place to start for people. So, I mean, there's a cognitive test that we use with clients that's been administered over 20 million times now in the last 2 decades. And it's like a fine-toothed comb, and it will show you, here's where things are working well. And if there's any sort of challenge, we can see that. Getting blood work done to look at hormones and nutrients and inflammatory markers and metabolic markers so that you have a sense of what's actually going on under the surface before things are a disaster and super obvious is critical. So that's my first answer. Now, outside of actually measuring things and figuring out what's there that you don't know that is affecting you now and causing problems down the road, aside from that, I would say a really good place to start is to just consider exercise, sleep, stress management, diet. Where are you in those areas? Where are you having success versus where is something that you're not so dialed in at?
Yeah.
I was talking to a client just the other day, and he's doing a really good job dietarily. His wife actually really wanted to move forward in a meaningful way, and so they eliminated ultra-processed food. They eliminated excess carbohydrates. They started prioritizing good fats and protein and eating plenty of fruits and vegetables. And he was seeing benefit from that, but this is not a guy that exercises. So an area for him to focus on is we got to get more physically active. And so we discussed ways that he can do that fit his lifestyle, that feel more enjoyable, that get him moving consistently. And that's the step. So everybody can evaluate that for themselves and start thinking about it.
That's huge. I know that with like you and your business of Mind for All Seasons, y'all work on optimizing this mental health and making people more productive. Yeah, I think if I'm a listener, if I hear everything you just said, it's like, okay, it sounds like I have a lot to do. Like, how do you see the area of like optimizing your mental health intersecting with business leaders and being more productive? Because if I'm adding something to my plate, how can I be more productive there?
Yeah. I, the key is to not add it to your plate as much as change how you view the plate and the choices that you're making. Everyone has to eat.
Right.
But
right.
if you learn some basic principles about how food affects the body, everyone thinks, oh, there's one right diet for the human body. And so people argue over, is it a vegan diet? Is it a Mediterranean diet? Is it a carnivore diet, etc.? That's crazy. If you think that every single human needs to eat one way, then that's just naive, in my opinion. But if you learn some principles, then you can make better decisions about how to fuel your body based on your goals. And you have to eat anyway. So you're just making different choices. When it comes to something like physical activity, this client that I mentioned earlier, he's never going to get up and go to the gym. He's not naturally motivated to do that. But when I had a discussion with him about, do you think you could park the furthest away from your office and just walk in briskly? Yeah, I can do that. Could you take the stairs in your office building consistently? Yeah. How would you feel about taking a break once an hour for 2 to 3 minutes and doing some air squats? Or he actually has a Peloton in his office. And I said, could you get on that and sprint for 2 minutes once an hour and just kind of take a break and get the blood flowing? And he's like, yeah, that's actually not that hard. I could totally do that. If you can make it as easy and effortless as possible to get results, then people do better. And that's part of why the magic in what my team and I do is it's coaching. You've got to help people find those solves that fit them.
Yeah, they need the expert to just tell them what to do. They're like, most people are willing and they want to be better. They're going to hear this and be like, okay, yes, I want more energy. I want to be more productive. I know my brain health matters. If there's one thing you want people to remember after listening to this about their brain, their health, their productivity, what would you want it to be?
I'd say the one thing is that you can have a better brain at any age. I've seen people in their knees have major improvements. I've seen people go from not being able to speak because of a degenerative disease to being able to speak, not being able to walk to being able to walk.
Wow.
So you can make your brain better at any age, and your brain is your tool. So are you paying attention to the tool? Are you taking really good care of it? And if you're doing that, then you're going to get more optimal results in every aspect of your life.
That's huge. If people want to connect with you, Eric, or your business, A Mind for All Seasons, where can people do that if they want to learn more about optimizing their mental and cognitive health?
Yeah, you can go to amindforallseasons.com. That's our website. You can follow me on social media, Eric D. Collett, Collett, on the major social channels. And we also have a very inexpensive membership site that provides a lot of education and access to direct coaching, if you're cool with me sharing that with people.
Absolutely, please.
So we realized a long time ago that people need to be able to come and ask experts. And so we built this membership site where there's live office hours multiple times a week. You can talk to the doctor that writes all our treatment summaries every week. You can talk to me every week, and we charge $25 a month for it. People say, you're crazy. Is it actually that good? We view it kind of like having a Costco membership because it gives you access to, if you want to get lab work done, if you want to get a comprehensive roadmap report, we call it, and a one-on-one coaching session to really work through that, you have access through the membership site. But to just have hundreds of hours of recorded content, live office hours, live weekly masterclass, $25 a month. So just go to amindforallseasons.com/join. And for listeners of your podcast, Jacob, if they put in the word waves at checkout, then they'll get 30 days free. There's no contract. So you can test drive it free for 30 days. And if you love the experience, then keep on going. It's an access point to learn more about your health and to get personalized guidance to solve some of these challenges that you might be up against.
I personally will be going to amindforallseasons.com/join, using that promo code of waves and getting my free month as well, which I'm very excited for. Eric, thank you so much for being on. I think what you're doing is really important and really cool. I could probably go for another 90 minutes and just keep asking you questions. So I think what you're doing is awesome. Really appreciate you being on today.
Well, thank you. It's been a fun conversation, Jacob. I really appreciate the privilege of being here with you.
Thank you so much for watching and listening to this episode of the Waves Business Coaching Podcast. Take care.